The Global Hydrogen Review is an outcome of the Clean Energy Ministerial Hydrogen Initiative, which is supported by more than 20 governments around the world. And the Global Hydrogen Review, the fourth edition, trusts key developments on low emissions hydrogen production, demand, infrastructure, trade, policy, investments, and innovation. These themes are covered in the fourth editions and are updated annually, but this year edition has two special focus chapters. One of these special focus chapters is on the greenhouse gas emissions associated to the different hydrogen supply chains. And then we have another special focus chapter on Latin America and the Caribbean. And this special focus chapter is a follow-up of the publication of the agency that we did last year, that is the Latin American Energy Outlook.
And I will directly dive into some of the key findings from this year's report, and would like to start with some positive news, which is about the product pipeline for low-emission hydrogen production. When we released the Global Hydrogen Review 2023 last year, the amount of projects that have reached a final investment decision stood in terms of production at 1.7 million tons. Over the last 12 months, we've actually seen acceleration of FIDs. So the production of these projects has actually doubled now to 3.4 million tons, which could correspond to a five-fold increase of the production for low-emission hydrogen that we have today. So increase of factor 5 between today and the product pipeline of projects that have reached FID. But the actual amount of projects that have been announced is much larger. So the projects that have reached FID account for 7% of the total potential production from announced projects. However, if you look at the maturity of these projects, almost half of these projects are very early stages of development, which means that it's highly uncertain whether all of these projects can be realized by 2030. For the full project pipeline to materialize, actually, the sector has to grow at an annual, at a compound annual growth rate of more than 90% between today and 2030, which is well above the growth rate that solar PV has experienced during its fastest period of growth or expansion. So it's a quite ambitious target if all these projects to be realized by 2030. Moreover, if you look at the sector, not all the news are good news. When you look at the hydrogen development of the hydrogen product pipeline, several projects have been delayed. We also saw even some cancellation of projects, which of course is putting at risk part of the product pipeline that has been announced so far. Underlying reasons for these delays or even cancellations are unclear demand signals, also financing challenges or hurdles. There have been also delays in government funding being provided to projects. There have been or are still existing regulatory uncertainties in some countries, and also permitting issues which are delaying final investment decisions of projects to move forward. By looking at the technology split of these announced projects, we can see that electrolyzers account for 3/4 of the product pipeline, and CCUS projects for around 1/4. If one just looks at the technology split for projects that have reached FID on the left side, there we can see that the technology split is more even between electrolyzers and CCUS. This suggests that CCUS projects or non-CCUS projects are more mature. And actually, if we just look at a handful of FIDs for CCUS projects that have been observed over the past year, these actually would match in terms of production 50 electrolyzer projects that have reached FID in the same period. So again, one sees also that the scale of these projects of CCUS are much larger than for electrolyzers.
Renewables' major expansion is not driven by policies, climate policies. They are purely, or at least I should say mainly, driven by economics. Today, renewables, solar and wind, especially solar, is the cheapest option to build a new power plant almost all countries around the world. And in many countries, in fact, solar plus storage, the battery storage, is cheaper than their competitors. So the biggest driver of the expansion we are seeing in the markets and in our report is driven by the economics mainly. And the numbers are striking. Last year, again, I was together with my colleague, Mr. Bahar here, to present you last year's report. And I remember very well saying that we are seeing in 2023 the historical record of renewables capacity additions, which was at that time, if I am not wrong, yes, 560 gigawatts last year, which was a historical record. And this year, 2024, this comes up to 670 gigawatts, 20% increase in 1 year. Huge growth, 670 gigawatts, and this is something, again, as I said, higher than many governments themselves expected. And when we look at the next few years, based on the projects, the investments, with the FIDs and country-by-country analysis, that the very detailed analysis, in fact, I should thank my colleague Mr. Bahar and his team, the capacity additions, total renewable capacity additions, will be around 5,500 gigawatts. 5,500 gigawatts. Which means this is equal to the entire power system, power fleet of United States plus China plus European Union plus India, 4 major markets put together, their entire power system equivalent will be built as renewables in the next 6 years to come.
So renewables are already generating more power than natural gas. So coal is the next one to pass. And the rest of the generation mix by 2030, as Jetro mentioned, we will have next week a more detailed fuel analysis coming from the World Energy Outlook publication. But one important point to make here that renewables are becoming basically the largest generation, and with wind and solar penetration increasing, accounting for 30% in our analysis. And more importantly, solar PV surpassing both hydropower and wind in terms of the generation to become the largest source of renewables by 2030. Maybe for the other one, for Europe, it was a turning point, obviously, what happened in 2022, the Russia's invasion of Ukraine. It was when Europe really started to accelerate renewable deployment compared to the period before. It's quite important to highlight this because with the policies that are pushed by the European Commission, Repower Europe, the new goals, and the governments actually implementing these policies very rapidly to address the challenges has been tremendously important for the renewable sector in the European Union. And we expect the spillover effects of this. And one important point that I think EU citizens and the European Union realized how vulnerable the energy prices are in Europe and how it can go very rapidly up, which actually stimulated renewables growth, especially from companies and individuals to install more renewables to reduce their bills. I think this trend was an important one to highlight, and we expect this to be a key driver going forward as well.
We are done dreaming of an industrialized Africa. No more enduring long journeys in darkness. No more imagining life without constant power. We are done. We are done. Done tolerating 24 hours without power, load shedding, blackouts, and power cuts. Enough. Imagine a life where our abundant natural resources can't power a generation. We can't cope with that reality. 600 million Africans still lack access to power. We have the solution. It's time to turn imagination into action. African Energy Week 2024 is the platform to implement change, sign deals, and take decisive action and implement. Join us. Invest in African energies. Energy growth through an enabling environment, and be part of the movement that brings hope to millions across the continent. It's not just about power, it's about empowering lives and giving African hope. Be there to witness the transformation. African Energy Week 2024, where imagination becomes reality. Secure your seat now. Don't miss out on African Energy Week 2024. Visit our website and buy your tickets today. Let's light up Africa and create a brighter future together.
Project than the time you need to build that project. Sign, baby, sign.
And just looking or considering what Crispian has spoken about, the global forces that South Africa has to navigate itself within, but also just looking very specifically at Eskom. We spoke a couple of weeks ago about the challenges that we face here in South Africa in making sure we have enough electricity while still sustaining our commitment to the targets that have been established. And last year, in the very intensity of the load shedding that we found, there was a tension there that emerged around whether we can commit while still providing a reliable source of electricity. It seems that has somewhat resolved with the lightening of load shedding, but I would love your appraisal on where you think we are now in that journey, and specifically around that apparent tension between what is required to power our economy and the commitments we've made to the just transition globally.
If you look at the work that we have done, we've already done some work at Komati, where we're decommissioning Komati, and we use that as a pilot to try and get a sense how best to handle this just an energy transition. And there were so many lessons that came out of that. One of those lessons is that don't wait until you have decommissioned and then you start the process of other projects, because the communities around have been impacted, and these projects take a long time to ramp up. You can actually decouple the execution of the move to renewables to the decommissioning of the power station. So that's one of the big lessons that we took out of Komati, and that's what we are implementing now. In fact, we're not waiting for these power stations to get to the end of life. We are already implementing some of the projects today. And that's how all of that came from the lessons that we got from Komati.
Maybe if I could posit my remarks within two dimensions. One is to seat the conversation surrounding a just energy transition within a broader global multilateral moment. And the second is to talk about what we're going through as a supply side crisis. Now, we're living in an epoch that has echoes of the 70s and the 1980s, to the extent that following the last 30 years of moderate multilateralism, in other words, fairly benign international relationships. Yes, there were some elements of tension, notably, say, between the United States and China in latter years. But for the most part, there wasn't an elevated geopolitical risk premium. And this decade, and likely the ensuing decades, we're now entering a period of multilateral contention. And I say that there's echoes of the 1970s and 80s in terms of the geopolitics, in the sense that that era too was defined as a contentious multilateral era. And it was triggered in the early 1970s with the oil crisis. So there's another common dimension with regard to what we're going through right now, in the sense that it's about energy systems. So in the early 70s, the Arab nations suddenly emerged in what was a bipolar world, and they harnessed that which lay beneath their soils, and they held it back from the United States. And as a consequence, the United States saw an end to its era of prosperity.
I do believe that the African Union's position and African member states' position is very clear. Africa does recognize that we all, the planet, we all have the same destination, a green planet. So the same responsibility too. But Africa is asking to the international community to recognize that Africa has a different starting point. We have 600 million people without electricity, and you are about to conclude the first quarter of the 21st century, where and when other countries are already dealing with artificial intelligence. At the same time, Africa has 600 million people without electricity. At the same time, Africa needs to generate on an annual basis or 18 million jobs, and is only generating between 3 and 5 million. So I do believe that it's fair and just to recognize that the only viable energy future for Africa is a balanced energy mix. And to do that, each African country should be entitled to undertake its own energy plan, define its own energy mix, driven by energy access, not energy transition, but keeping at the same time that Africa needs to contribute to a green planet, and keeping at the same time that Africa has a different starting point. Otherwise, we'll not be able to deliver the Agenda 2030 and the Agenda 2060.